Good afternoon. I'm going to share the findings of a study that was done in Ghana and Uganda, looking at the early pregnancy and parenting among young women who have left care in Ghana and Uganda. My name is Dr. Kwabena Frimpong. I'm a lecturer at the University of Ghana, the Department of Social Work. To provide some background to the study, young women with a care experience are at a higher risk of early pregnancy. Some of the factors that contribute to this risk of early pregnancy and parenting include the lack of awareness and access to sexual and reproductive health information and services. Also, young women in care are often or usually have unsafe sex, have multiple sexual partners, and start their sexual debut a bit earlier than the rest of the young population. Being pregnant and parenting adds to the challenges that youth transitioning out of care face. So aside the challenges that youth in care face with, or youth who have left care face with employment, housing, education, health, being pregnant also adds to these challenges, and it makes it more difficult for them to achieve the adult social markers and have positive adult outcomes. In some of the developed countries, there are some support and prevention interventions for this group of young women. One of these interventions is, in some countries, to help them stay in care longer. So by extending their stay in care, it prevents them from getting pregnant early by reducing some of the risk factors. Also, having a trusted relationship with an adult is also a way of reduce early pregnancy among this vulnerable population, because they can get mentorship, have role models, get advice about safer sex and other things. The majority of the research on young women in care who get pregnant early or become parents at an early age is largely from the global north. So most of what we know currently is from the global north. Little of this knowledge exists or pertains in the global south. However, the current evidence suggests that the global south, including sub-Saharan Africa, have the highest rates of teenage pregnancy and early pregnancies among the general youth population. Therefore, there's a lack of knowledge when it comes to what is happening or pertaining to young people who have had an experience in either residential care or foster care. Therefore, this study explores the experiences of pregnant and parenting youth with a care experience in Ghana and Uganda to fill in this research gap. To undertake the study or to gain information from the young women, the study employed a qualitative design because we wanted to get to know the experiences and perceptions of these young women. And therefore, we thought that using a qualitative research design suited our research aims. The participants were chosen if they were, one, had been a resident of SOS Children's Villages for 2 years. We chose SOS Children's Villages in the first place because we wanted a residential care facility that was operating both in Ghana and Uganda, and so could give us a good basis to have a comparison. In most global south countries, and in both Ghana and Uganda, residential care is the most used out-of-home care placement. So the majority, almost 99% of children who are in care would be placed in residential care. And because we wanted, though they are public and private residential care facilities, we chose SOS, which is an international children's village, for this study because we wanted a means to compare the findings between the two countries. The second criteria was that the participants should have been pregnant or had a child before leaving the Children's Village or SOS. And the third inclusion criteria was that the person should be a parent for at least 2 years. We chose 2 years because we thought that would give them enough experiences for them to share within the study. Overall, 10 participants took part in the study, 5 from Uganda and 5 from Ghana. Data was collected using semi-structured interviews with the aid of a pilot tested guide. So we developed a guide for the semi-structured interviews based on the research questions and then what we knew from the literature. And this research guide or interview tool was piloted with 2 care leavers in each of the countries. We made modifications to the interview guide based on what we gathered from the pilot stage, and we modified it basically a little bit of wording to make the questions more understanding for the participants, and also added some of the things that the interviewees in the pilot study felt was important to ask other candidates. The interviews were in person, usually in the participants' home or in their offices, and they lasted an average of 30 minutes. The range was between 25 to 30 minutes, or sometimes in some interviews it went up to between 50 to 60 minutes. And they were in English and were audio recorded. To do the data analysis to do the data analysis of the information that we got from the interviews, we used Braun and Clark's 6-step schematic strategy to analyze the data and be able to get some findings for the study. With regards to the participants' demographics, the average of the participants in this study was 25 years. So most of the young people, because we wanted somebody who had been a parent for 2 or more years, sent the age limit a bit up. So though their first age of pregnancy was 18 years, most of the participants that we met were over 22, 23 years, and some going up to 28 years. In terms of marital status, 3 of the participants were single, 4 were cohabiting, and 3 were living with their partners as a married couple. With regards to employment, 6 were self-employed in vocations including trading, being hairdressers. Some had their own small businesses that they were managing. 1 was working in a formal sector, and 3 were students. With regards to their educational level, we had 2 who had finished junior high school, 2 had finished senior high school, 5 had post-secondary education, and 1 had gone through vocational training, formal vocational training. So the first aspect of the study was to look at the factors that caused early pregnancy among the participants. Analyzing the interviews, we realized that a major factor that was contributing to early pregnancy among the study population was the inadequate sexual and reproductive health. So in Ghana, the participants said that they hardly had anybody giving them information in the residential care facilities, but they had some information in school. In Uganda, the participants mentioned having some information in both school and in the residential care facilities. Even though they had received some information, the participants suggested that most of this information was very superficial information. So it didn't really go into detail it just scratched the surface and didn't give them information that they thought would have helped them be more abreast with sexual and reproductive health issues, and knowledge about how to assess sexual and reproductive health services, knowledge about how to be in intimate relationships, and other information that they thought would have helped them prevent unwanted pregnancies. So they felt that a lot of the pregnancies that they had at that early age were not pregnancies that were planned, but most of them were pregnancies that resulted from mistakes that they made because of their lack of sexual and reproductive health issues. Also, there were issues about, because of their lack of knowledge about sexual and reproductive health, they weren't aware of some of the services that were available to help them even when they got pregnant. Another key factor that the participants suggested as a reason for becoming pregnant early was limited supervision. So what we found out through the interviews was that in SOS, they have different transitional stages before the young people go out of care. So when they are first placed, they are placed in a children's village. And then at the ages starting from 14 years and above, based on their maturity level, they are then sent into what they call a youth home. And then they spend 2 or 3 years in a youth home, which has some form of supervision, but is not supervised as closely as they would have in the children's village. And then if they are still in school or they are learning a trade, they moved into semi-independent living accommodation, either within the communities where the children's villages are located, or reintegrate back with their families but are still supported by SOS Children's Villages. However, they felt that within these transitional points, moving to the youth homes or moving into semi-independent living, they lacked a supervision. And because most of them had been in the residential care facilities, which was kind of closed off from the wider community in terms of interaction with other peers and other members of the community, they sometimes felt they were vulnerable and exploited in their relationships. And for example, Bella, who's from Uganda, talked about how she was reintegrated back with her mother, even though her mother had issues with alcohol or was an alcoholic. And after living with her for some months, her mother drove her out of the home, and she was forced to then go in for a boyfriend who eventually got her pregnant at a very early age. The next thing we explored in the interviews was the challenges that come with early pregnancy and parenting for this group of young women. One of the key issues that they experienced was emotional stress and physical abuse. So with regards to emotional stress, the participants talked about having to conceal their pregnancies because if SOS found out that they were pregnant, they were going to lose their support if they were in transitional accommodation, for example, the youth homes or semi-independent living. So long as they got pregnant, SOS would cut off their support because it was part of their policy. Or if they were in the children's home, they would be evicted from the homes. So a lot of them had to hide their pregnancy, and it came with a lot of stress because they had to find ways to hide the pregnancy from their caregivers, from the directors of the residential care facilities. And hiding the pregnancy also meant that most of them didn't have adequate medical attention, especially in the initial stages of the pregnancy, because that's once the pregnancy showed, then they couldn't hide it again. But they wouldn't have got any medical attention during the early phases where the pregnancy wasn't showing and they could hide it. The denial of the pregnancy by their partners also added to the emotional stress. So for a lot of them, their partners refused to accept the pregnancies. and that also added to the stress of they becoming pregnant, having to hide it from their caregivers and the other essential care staff, and also having to deal with the fact that the fathers of these babies weren't accepting or were denying the pregnancies. And for some of them, when they denied the fathers even accepted it, they encouraged them to go and have an abortion, which, if they refused, resulted in physical maltreatment and abuse by these male partners. And for a few of the participants, they suggested that these physical abuse and denial and emotional stress made them very vulnerable to suicidal tendencies and wanting to commit suicide. So, for example, Mary in Uganda talks about how when her boyfriend started treating her badly because she had become pregnant, she wished she could kill herself, and on several occasions had those ideas about killing herself. Another key challenge that came with being pregnant and parenting at an early age was financial and employment difficulties. So a lot of them didn't have informal support from parents or other caregivers or other guardians because either they were orphaned or they were abandoned and so did not know their backgrounds or had very limited contact with their extended family or parents. And OSOS itself had also reduced its support or taken away the support that it was given to them. So they didn't have anybody to help them, both with financial support, but also with caregiving, to allow them to be able to go and find employment. And so for most of them, that's why they were in self-employment, because they had to be able to provide caregiving for their children and then find something to do to earn some income. And even for those who were married, some of them also complained that because their husbands weren't prepared to help them take care of the babies or were also working and they couldn't afford childcare services, they had to then leave their jobs to become housewives or have to do something which was closer home to their homes so that they could both provide care for the children and also find some income. So Vivian, for example, talked about having to stop a job which was quite lucrative because her husband kept complaining that she wasn't returning home early to take care of the children. She had 2 children at the time that the interviews were done. And she had to open a small business close to her home where she was really petty trading. So for her, it wasn't very profitable, but it was something she had to do because she couldn't afford daycare, so she didn't have any external support, and so had to rely on that small business to be able to. So a lot of the young women in the study, even when they were employed, were doing very low-paying jobs, jobs that didn't have any real or didn't provide any real financial security, and also had financial challenges, very low incomes, and so on. Another challenge that the participants talked about, and this was a majority of the participants, was that they faced stigma and discrimination, especially among the community members who already stigmatized them because of their orphan or birth identity or being in care, and also because they felt that they were, in quotes, spoiled children. That's why they had gotten pregnant. And also friends at school made mockery of them, which made it difficult for them to, develop friendships and relationships and so on. So a big part of the emotional issues that they also faced was because of the stigma and discrimination that they faced from people in their schools and within the communities. Bella talked about losing friends, losing relatives, and felt that because of the stigma that she experienced from these people, it even seemed as if it was a curse for her to become pregnant early. And she really showed a lot of emotion during the interviews because she felt that she, because of the pregnancy, she had had to lose people who were very close to her. And that was a big emotional drain on her. We also explored the coping mechanisms that the participants used in this study. Um, one of the key coping strategies that they used was to have a positive drive. So, in spite of the challenges that the participants were going through, most of the young girls that we spoke to them in the interviews had a big desire to succeed. You know, they envisioned a bright future where things would get better. So they weren't focusing too much on the challenges, but were focusing on having the drive and the zeal to work harder to make things better for their children. And a key thing that drove them was to ensure that their children didn't go through the things they were going through. Another key coping strategy among the participants was using their faith and religion as a way of dealing with the challenges that they have. So a lot of them were involved in faith-based activities like praying as a way to handle the emotional challenges, the stigma and other things that um, um, drain them emotionally. But aside the prayers and the other spiritual aspects, they also had a lot of social support from their peers and other people within the church. So from time to time, some of them mentioned that church members would give them some financial support, some even gave them information about job opportunities and other things that help them cope with the challenges that have been addressed earlier in this presentation. So basically our findings kind of were consistent, especially with the factors contributing to early pregnancy and parenting among young women with a care experience. Our findings were consistent with other research studies that have been done in some global north countries. An explanation or a possible explanation as to why the young women didn't have or had inadequate sexual and reproductive health information was because in most of the residential care facilities in Uganda and in Ghana, the research suggests that there's a high child care caregiver ratio, and that most of the caregivers are lowly educated or and untrained. And so, given the number of children they have to take care of and the fact that they themselves didn't have adequate information and knowledge about sexual and reproductive health, and also to add that most of the institutions, because getting pregnant was against their rules, and even dating was intimate relationships was against their rules. This information about sexual and reproductive health was not prioritized, or even was something that was in their books, wasn't something that was done because the caregivers didn't either have time or didn't have the skills to approach the subject. So this could be a major reason why young people in the residential care facilities and the young women that we interviewed didn't have adequate information on sexual and reproductive health. The evidence from the global north suggests that a key way of reducing early pregnancies is to extend care, the care that young people have, either in foster care or residential care. What we found in this study was that even though ideally, or even though the residential care facilities were that we chose, SOS, had a model that tried to also extend the care for young people in residential care, because the typical age for leaving care in Ghana is 18 years. But in SOS, most of them would leave after 18, usually after they finish their junior high, senior high education. What we realized that when young people moved into these transitional facilities and independent living accommodation or semi-independent living accommodation, the supervision was lax or very not proper. So what happened was that the young people couldn't take advantage of the extended care, where being in care, young people could avoid the risk of getting pregnant because they had supervision, they were being monitored, and that kind of in a way prevented them from getting pregnant. So though these young women were staying in care a bit longer, when they moved into these semi-independent living facilities, the supervision and monitoring was not adequate, and that led some of them to get pregnant early. This study also points to the fact that even among care leavers in Africa, where the growing research is showing that many of the young people who leave residential care face challenges with employment and housing, and have lower educational attainment, just like in the global north. The young women who get pregnant also have another layer of facing stigma and having employment challenges, because they have to provide caregiving and also have emotional challenges, which then adds to the already existing challenges that the majority of care leavers face. So the study is suggesting to us that this is a subgroup of care leavers who face additional vulnerabilities, and so we must research must and services and interventions that are developed must target this particular subgroup, because they have an added layer of difficulties and challenges when they transition from care to adult or independent. Also, what this study has revealed is that a lot of the young women who become pregnant or are parenting are in partnerships where the men are abusive, and which could indicate that there's a need to develop measures to assist these young women in developing healthy, intimate relationships. And there's a possibility that because they don't have adequate knowledge of sexual and reproductive health issues, including how to choose or be in a healthy relationship, these young women cannot prevent or avoid unhealthy relationships. And so this is a finding that suggests that providers of residential care and caregivers must intensify the knowledge that they share among these young people on sexual and reproductive. The implications of the findings include the fact that residential care facilities may be in the two countries, or should in the two countries have somebody who is trained to provide sexual and reproductive health information to these young people. As the findings have suggested, that the caregivers are either not in the position to do it because they have too much children and young people to care for, or do not have the skills. And so if we want to improve the knowledge that these young women have on sexual and reproductive health, then it might be advisable that there's a trained person in the facilities to provide this knowledge. Also, there could be multi-sectoral coordination between different agencies. For example, between the residential care facilities, the district social welfare officers who work for the state, and other NGOs that are providing sexual and reproductive health services to provide access to psychosocial support to help these young women cope with their challenges or the challenges that they face. Because the residential care facilities, and it must be mentioned that in most of the countries in Africa, including Ghana and Uganda, there's no statutory or state support for young women or care leavers. And so once young people leave these residential care facilities, they are on their own. And so our proposal or recommendation or one implication of the study is that if different agencies came together, they could be in a better position to provide the psychosocial support that these young women need when they are faced with the different challenges they encounter. Also, we felt that either social workers in the residential care facilities or district social workers should provide some monitoring and supervision for young women who are in transitional housing or for young people in transitional housing so that they can help them make informed and positive decisions around sexual health and relationships. So given the fact that the findings have given us evidence about how the lack of supervision and monitoring serves as a risk factor for some women to get pregnant early, we thought that social workers, both those working in the residential care facilities as well as those working in the districts as state employed social workers, could provide some supervision and monitoring to these young people. We also felt that one of the reasons why the care homes or residential care facilities evicted the young people and took away the support from them was because there's this idea that if they don't evict them or reduce their support, other people or other young people were encouraged to also get pregnant. And so, or there will be a bad influence on the younger ones. And so we felt that if that is their thinking, then the residential care facilities could have a separate accommodation to help these young mothers give birth and then provide them with some support during the early stages of parenthood and help them transition into the wider society in a more gradual and phased manner, which the evidence from research suggests that helps to the young people to achieve positive adult outcomes. There were some limitations of the study. One was that the sample size that we had expected, we wanted to do more interviews with young and pregnant or early young women who had gotten pregnant early. We wanted to do more interviews, but this was restricted because of the COVID, because the data collection was done in 2020 when the COVID was at its height in both Ghana and Uganda. And some of the women couldn't be located. There were others too who were dealing with their own issues relating to COVID and so declined to be part of the study. So that was one major limitation of the study. Another drawback is that, as I mentioned earlier, there are different residential care facilities in Ghana and Uganda. And so the providers, the structures in these residential care facilities might vary very differently from what is in SOS Children's Village. And possibly if we had done some interviews of young women who had gotten pregnant early from other residential care facilities, we might have found other interesting results that we didn't find in the study. So that was also another limitation. Thank you very much for spending time to listen to this presentation. And I hope that you would look for the article, full article, which has the same title as this presentation, to read more at your leisure, get more information from that. Thank you very much.